Congratulations on the University of Oslo's Human Rights Prize. What's your reaction to this award?
Mostly just surprise. I didn't know I was being nominated. It's a very strange feeling. It feels like it's happening to somebody else. And of course I'm very pleased. I mean, I'm delighted. What happened, they told me a couple of months ago, and so they emailed me to say that somebody important from the university wanted to talk to me. So of course I thought I was in trouble. Like, what have I done wrong? Because I worked on a project with the Norwegian Human Rights Centre based at the university. So I thought maybe I've got something wrong or made a mistake or in trouble. So I was nervous when they called, and then wonderfully they said, you've won the prize. So of course, very excited, and it's very strange. It's very strange.
What inspired you to dedicate your life to the fight for human rights?
I don't think I ever woke up one day and made a choice. It was something, I guess, which just felt right, was fairly natural. When I was 18, I finished high school and more or less failed my exams, right? I failed my exams, couldn't go to university. And so in a very strange move, I went to live with my uncle, who at that time was a priest in South Africa, at a time when South Africa was ruled by a racist regime and people were only allowed to live in certain areas depending on which race they were, right? So my uncle and I lived in a huge town where blacks only, people officially designated as black, were allowed to live. So that was a very strange experience for me, and I got very radicalized, I guess, politicized, very young when I was 18. So I was there for a year, and then after that, I mean, you know, I didn't want a job in an insurance office.
We read that you worked in some of the world's most dangerous regions. What drives you to continue despite the risks?
The risks are real, and I often hear people being described, local activists who work in those regions, as being described as fearless, and it's not true. Most of the people I work with in those places are terrified because it's scary. But you see how important it is to do that work, right? And there's, you know, much of the work that human rights people do is writing reports or writing articles, and you hope that it will have an effect one day, right? And sometimes it does, right? But with this sort of work in war zones, you often see like an immediate result of your work, like an immediate change. You know, you go and evacuate somebody from the front line. I mean, there's an immediate, obvious change in their situation. Or you bring a doctor to somebody, you bring food to somebody. So I guess that's the motivation. You know, there's an instant, easy to understand success or reward from that.
What's the biggest challenges working with human rights?
People generally don't understand the terms around human rights, and that's partly our fault. I mean, the people who work in human rights, we haven't explained it very well over the last couple of generations, you know. When I say I work in human rights, often people are like, what's that? So there's a general lack of understanding about what that work is. I don't think it always has a positive image. And then, of course, at the moment, I mean, over the last few years, there are new challenges. The funding really for this work is disappearing. You see a rise of right-wing, authoritarian, popular regimes in all sorts of countries. One thing I'm very worried about, which I don't think is getting much recognition, is that young men in Europe, in the US and other places appear not to have much enthusiasm to do human rights work or to be part of the human rights movement. And I think that's fairly new and alarming to me, that young men don't think that human rights are their responsibility or any of their business. And yeah, I'm increasingly worried about that.
How does lack of human rights influence children and youth?
Well, it influences everybody. A lot of the work that I do at the moment in Ukraine in evacuating people from places under fire is usually very elderly people. But clearly, whether youth, child, middle-aged or older, a lack of human rights impacts your everyday life, whether that's you not being able to access the things that you have a right to, shelter, food, safe environment, if you're in trouble, a fair trial, not to be tortured, all of those things. I think that this is an easy answer, I know, but social media has changed some things. I think sometimes the influence of that is over-exaggerated. But I think it's really impacted young people, particularly on their right to privacy. So people have a right to privacy, right? One of those non-negotiable rights. And the increase in influence of social media and people being able to see what you're looking at, I think is starting really to push into that right of privacy. And I think for young people and youth, that's a big issue.
In which countries or parts of the world is the lack of human rights greatest?
I don't like to rank countries because if you have a country you say this is the worst, right? And this is like halfway down the list, and then countries at the bottom they're pretty good. Then, if you start to have like a league table, then those countries which look fairly good think they don't have to improve, right? So the standard really isn't about is one country better than another. The standard is any country living up to the standard that it should, and I don't see any country living up to the standard that it should.
What do you think about this year's Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Machado?
I don't know her. I think possibly she's staying here, actually. I don't know her. I didn't know much about her. I've read some mixed things. I see that she said some supportive things about President Trump, which I wouldn't agree with. The Nobel Peace Prize still has enormous prestige, right? Despite some history of controversy over the years. And I know she's controversial, but I don't know well enough really to pass much judgment on her.
Can you tell us which challenges are the biggest in Venezuela right now?
No. I know virtually nothing about Venezuela. I know that there's a repressive regime and freedom of expression and the ability for people to voice peaceful dissent is cracked down on, as it is in plenty other places in the world. But I've never even been to Venezuela, and one of the things I don't like to do is to give an opinion about something I really don't know very much about.
What can we as young people do to help ensure that human rights are protected?
First of all, don't think you can't do anything, right? It's really as much your responsibility as anybody else's. I think one of the weaknesses of the human rights movement is people believing they need to be qualified or experienced to start doing human rights work, and that's not true, right? In fact, I see people, young people, including people under 18, in various places in the world doing human rights work. And you don't have to travel abroad to do it. You don't have to do anything particularly dramatic or go to a war zone to do it. There's plenty of things that people here in Norway, including young people, can be doing.
What message would you like to share with young people who aspire to work in human rights?
I'm very sorry, is my message. My generation has really left things in a terrible state for you. And we made some big gains in the early 1990s, right? Things really shifted in a very positive way between the end of the 1980s and the early 90s. And my generation wasted that chance. And now we've somehow drifted into a very bad place, and I think it's getting worse now generally. So an apology on behalf of my generation to have left you with such a mess. Secondly, though, I'm long-term optimistic because I think people did turn it around at the end of the 1980s and early 90s, including people who were young then. And so I hope that despite this terrible situation we've left you with, that you're going to be able to change it around. And I don't see why not. I think you can. I think it's time really that people woke up to how bad things are. And I'm afraid, and I'm sorry again, that it's going to be up to your generation and possibly even the generation after you before we turn things around again.
Thank you for taking your time.